Pre-Cal students, in this video we will be looking at systems of inequalities. The first two lessons dealt with systems of equations, and now we will be looking at inequalities, okay? So remember, the first two lessons in this chapter, we looked at equations. Now we'll be looking at systems of inequalities. Obviously, there will be some differences, okay? Your heading today is Graphing Inequalities. Please copy that down. Lesson 14.3. Graphing Inequalities, Lesson 14.3. And be sure and include today's date. Okay? I'll give you a second to copy that down. Graphing Inequalities, Lesson 14.3. And be sure and include today's date. Understand, when you are graphing inequalities, you are graphing a region. You are not just graphing a line or a parabola or a polynomial curve. All of these you've done in Algebra 2 before, or whatever you might be graphing. When you're graphing an equation, you usually have a line or a parabola or a circle or a hyperbola or a polynomial curve or whatever. But when you are graphing inequalities, you are graphing a region, a shaded region, okay? You need to understand that. So take whatever notes you want to here. But when you are graphing inequalities, you are graphing a region. Now, let's start off by graphing this inequality. So please copy this down, okay? Here we go. Y is greater than x squared minus 1. So go ahead and copy this in your notes. I'll give you a minute and then quickly draw a coordinate plane here so you can graph it, okay? I'll wait just a couple seconds while you do that. Okay, copy this down please, and copy down a coordinate plane. Now while you're finalizing that, please listen to me carefully, students. First of all, whenever you're graphing an inequality, I want you to learn to rewrite it with an equal sign off to the side. That's the first thing you do. Got it? Secondly, you must learn from Algebra 2 to recognize the equation. Now it's been a couple years, so I will bear with you and help you, but this is called a quadratic equation. And a quadratic equation always graphs a parabola. Sometimes they open upward, sometimes they open downward. Remember, that should ring a bell, and every parabola has a vertex, a point that's right in the middle of the parabola. Alright, so let's quickly review what we're going to do here. First of all, we have to find the vertex. Do you remember how to find the vertex? Let me help you. Take some notes. Negative b over, let me pause and say this, Mr. Earhart, why do we have to know how to graph parabolas? Because in your homework and your quiz on Thursday, I'm not just going to give you linear inequalities, I'm going to give you parabolas and some other ones, okay? So that's why we're going over this. Remember, when you go to find the vertex of a parabola, you use negative b over 2a, okay? Now, please look, in this equation here, your a is always what's with the x squared. Your b is always what's with the x. Now there is no x, so I'm going to put 0x. And your c is always your constant term. So there's a 1 here. 1 would be your a, 0 would be your b, and c would be your negative 1. Make sure you understand that, okay? So as I'm using this formula to find the vertex of the parabola, as I'm using this formula, understand a is 1 and b is 0, okay? So here we go. A is 1, b is 0, so negative 0 over 2 times 1. That would be 0 over 2, which is 0, okay? So here's what you did right there. You were able to find the vertex, the x value of the vertex. And so we're going to put that right in the middle of our table of values, okay? Now I might be teaching this a little different than Mrs. Walker did, I'm not sure, maybe I'm not, but this here gives you the x value of the vertex. So this number here that you get out from using this formula right here goes right here in the middle, okay? Then we go up a couple, and we go down a couple. Alright, now, using your graphing calculator, you can quickly enter this into your calculator if you want to. We've learned how to do that. And then go to your table of values. And when you go to your table of values, you'll be able to fill this out. Or, because this equation here is really easy, you could probably put these values into x very quickly and get out your y. For example, put a 2 in for x. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. Put a 1 in for x. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. Put a 0 in for x. 0 times 0 is 0. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Put a negative 1 in for x. When you square a negative 1, you get 1. So 1 minus 1 is 0. Put a negative 2 in for x. When you square a negative 2, a negative times a negative is a positive 4. Positive 4 minus 1 is 3. So there we go. We have the points for our parabola. Parabola over 2, up 3, over 1, up 0, 0, negative 1, negative 1, 0, negative 2, 3. Now stop before you go like this and sketch your parabola. I want to remind you guys of something, okay? You're not graphing an equation. You're graphing an inequality, okay? So you don't want to put this parabola yet. Go back to your inequality. Look at your inequality, please, students. Notice there's no equal sign. In other words, we don't say y is greater than or equal to. There's no line here. It's just y is greater than. So when there's no line here, you have a dotted graph. So when you go to draw your parabola, be sure and put a dotted parabola. Well, Mr. Earhart, when would the parabola be solid? The parabola would be solid when you have a line right here, like that. Okay, it would look like this. Y is greater than or equal to, and we don't have that. Okay, so there we go. Now, how do you know where to shade, students? Do you shade inside the parabola? Or do you shade outside the parabola? Okay? Well, that's where testing a point comes in. So please take some really good notes. You have to test a point on the outside or inside to see if you get out a true value. Now, please listen, students. It's always easiest to use a point on the y-axis. Please trust me on that. It's always now you can use any point you want. You can test a point way over here, or you can test a point way over here. I don't care. But the problem is easier if you pick a point that lies on the y-axis. So you might want to make note of that. And then next, if 0, 0 is available, that's the best point to use. Okay? So I'm going to test 0, 0. Okay? Test 0, 0. Now watch what happens. You test it in your inequality. So here's my x, here's my y. Where the y is, I'm going to put a 0. Where the x is, I'm going to put a 0. 0 squared is 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Is that true or is that false? 0 is greater than 1. That's true. 0 is greater than negative 1. So if this ordered pair is true, then that means I want to shade where the ordered pair is. Now, if this ordered pair had given me out a false statement, if this would have been false, if it would have said 0 is less than negative 1 like that, then that means this point here is what? False. So I'd want to shade outside the parabola. But since that point is true, then I want to shade where the point is. So I'm going to shade on the inside. Now I want to stress to you guys again one more time. Listen to me. You did not have to use 0, 0 to get the right answer. You can test any point you want on the graph. Now listen, as long as it doesn't lie in the parabola, you cannot test a point that lies on the parabola. So make sure you pick a point that's not close to the parabola, like right here, that point right there. Okay, it's too close to tell. But you can pick any point you want. But the easiest points to use are the points that lie and the y-axis. And the best point of all to use is 0, 0 when you can, okay? So look this over. It's not too bad. It's not too hard, but you have to know how to do it. Now, do you see what I mean about graphing a region? Okay? When you go to graph an inequality, you're not just getting out a line or a parabola or a polynomial curve or whatever. You're getting out a shaded area. Okay? Very important you understand that. Now, let's go ahead and let's try graphing a linear inequality. Remember, we just graphed a what? A quadratic inequality. Now we're going to graph a linear inequality. Okay, so here it is. Go ahead and copy this down, please. And then go ahead and draw a coordinate plane, and I'll give you a minute to do that. Copy down the inequality, and then copy down a coordinate plane. Okay, now remember, students, the first thing I taught you to do is rewrite the inequality with an equal sign. Okay? Now, when you go to draw your line over here, are you going to put a solid line or a dotted line? Well, look at your inequality. Is there an equal sign underneath of the line? No, there's not. If there was, you would graph a solid line, but there's no line here, so we are going to graph a dotted line. Okay? Now, continuing on. How you graph this linear equation is totally up to you, okay? In Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, you learn the table of values method. You learn the slope-intercept method. And you learn the double-intercept method. I don't care. For me personally, I can only do one example here. For me, whenever I have a linear equation that has an x, then a y, then an equal sign, then a constant term, I like the double intercept method. So in other words, I put 0 in for x, and I get out a y value. 0 minus y is negative y. So if negative y equals 2, y equals negative 2. Okay, so I put 0 in for x, so I have the ordered pair 0, negative 2. Now I'm going to put 0 in for y. X minus 0 is x. X equals 2. So the ordered pair would be you put a 0 in for y and got out x for 2. So 2, comma, 0. Okay? So really, to draw a line, all that you need is 2 points. And we have our 2 points. So 0, negative 2, and 2, 0. Okay? Let's go ahead and draw our dotted line here. Now, how do I know where to shade, students? Am I going to shade up here? Or am I going to shade down here? Well, please do not think that you can look at this and know. That's not the case. You have to test a point, okay? So I'm going to test a point. Now remember, the best values to use are values that lie right on the y-axis. And the best out of all the points to use is 0, 0. Well, you cannot use 0, 0 if 0, 0 is lying on the graph. Is 0, 0 lying on the graph? No, it is not. So I'm going to test this point. I'm either going to get out a false or I'm going to get out a true statement for this point. So here we go. Let's test 0, 0. 0 minus 0's less than 2. 0's less than 2. That is true. 0 is less than 2. So this point here is true, okay? So if it's true, then I've got to shade where that point is. So for this inequality here, I would shade above this line, okay? So there we go. Not too difficult. All right, let's continue on. So far we've graphed a quadratic inequality right here, a parabola. And now we've graphed a linear inequality, okay? Now let's take this a step further, okay? What if I I gave you more than one inequality. Well, we would call this a system of inequalities. In order to solve a system of inequalities, well, to be honest, you really just can't solve a system of inequalities. You can't do it. But what you can do is you can graph the system and see the answer. So you really cannot get out a numerical answer in most systems of inequalities, but you can graph it and get a picture of what the graph is. So that's what we're going to do. So because you have to see the answer, students, let's do this. Hold on one second here. Let's go ahead and try one of these and see what to do, okay? So I'm going to wait a minute here. I need you to copy down this inequality system and then copy down a coordinate plane. I'll give you a minute to do that. Now students, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have to graph each one of these. And I'm not going to lie to you. These types of problems here can really be a pain, okay? But if you'll stick with them, do them slowly, take your time. Hopefully you won't make any mistakes and you'll get them right, okay? But they are going to take a little bit of time. And I will take that into consideration when I give your homework to you. Now, let's take this first problem here. Let's rewrite it with an equal sign. Okay, there we go. Now, let's go ahead and put 0 in for x like I like to do. 2 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 4y is 4y. So divide both sides by 4. Y equals 2. So I put in 0 and I got out 2. Now let's put a 0 in for y. So my next ordered pair will have a 0 right here for y. So 2x plus 4, put a 0 in for y. This is called the double intercept method. 4 times 0 is 0. 2x plus 0 is 2x. Divide both sides by 2. X equals 4. Okay, so there we go. So very quickly, I have 0, 2, and I have 4, 0. Now before you draw your line, look at your inequality over here. Do I have an equal sign underneath it? No, I do not. So it will be a dotted line. Okay, so here we go. Dotted line. Not the best dotted line in the world, but you get the point, okay? Now, remember, we gotta test a point. 0, 0 is my favorite point to test. So where the x is, I'm gonna put a 0. Where the y is, I'm gonna put a 0. 2 times 0 is 0. 4 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. So 0 is less than 8. Is that a true statement? Yes, it is. So 0, 0 did work. So I'm going to shade. Hold it. A lot of you are already doing this, and you're shading. Don't do that, guys. Don't do that. There's other lines we have to put up here still. So instead of shading, put an arrow here so you know which way you're supposed to shade. Okay? And it's very important. I always label my graphs so I know what equation they went to. You don't have to do that, but I do. Okay, now, y is greater than negative 2. Let's write that with an equal sign. Now guys, I know it's been a while since you've had algebra, but hopefully you remember how to graph these, okay? This should be a vertical line, okay? X equals negative 2. So we go to the x-axis at negative 2. Put a point here, and it should be a vertical line. Now notice there's no equal sign here, okay? So it's going to be a dotted line going up and down like this. Okay? Now I know I've taught you to test a point. However, there are some exceptions. And guess what? You're going to love these exceptions whenever the line is vertical or perfectly horizontal like this. You don't have to test a point. You can just look at the inequality and know which way to go. X is greater than -2. Well, you know which way to go. That's going to be to the right. I mean, you're right here at -2. If you go to the left, that's less than -2. And this says X is greater than -2. So we're going to shade to the right. Okay? Now, let's go on to our last. Let's label this number 2. Label this equation number 2. Now let's go on to equation number 3. Okay? Number 3. Well, let's rewrite this with an equal sign. Y equals 3. So I know I'm going to go through the y-axis at 3. So there we go. And look at this. I do have an equal sign here. So it's going to be a solid line going right through 3 on the y-axis. There we go. There we go. Now what does it say? Y is less than. Okay, y is less than 3. So I know I'm going to shade downward. So I've got to shade where all these lines agree. Okay? Now, some students really struggle with this, so I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this, and you may pick the one you like the best. Okay? Alright. In my opinion, the best way to do this is just try to figure it out by looking at the lines, or the parabolas, or the polynomial curves, or whatever graph you have, okay? In this case here, I'm going to look at my black line. I know it's vertical. I know I have to shade this way, so I know for sure any shading that I do has to be over here somewhere. It has to be, okay? I cannot go to the left of the black line. I also know I can't go above the green line, so I know any shading I do has to be to the right of the black line, and it has to be below the blue line. So I know I'm going to be in this region here, somewhere below the blue line, to the right of the black line. Now, I also notice I have to be below the red line, so here it is. There we go. Notice I'm below the blue line. Notice I'm below the red line. And notice I'm to the right of the black line. Okay? So there we go. There's the right answer. So, do you see what I'm saying? You really just can't solve a system of inequalities. You have to get a graph and see the answer. So here's the answer right here. This whole green shaded area is your answer. Okay? Now, you say, Mr. Hart, you told us you would show us one more way to shade. Yes, I'll show you one other way. And some students in the past have really liked this, okay? Okay, now, a lot of students. Some students have liked this. They've been, what I've told them, they get really confused on this. So I said, look, do the opposite. Go to every line and shade exactly opposite of what it says. So I go to my first line, line 1. And this is line 3 right here. Go to line 1, the red line. It says to shade down. So I'm going to do the opposite. Okay, I'm gonna be rebellious here. I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna shade everywhere that this red line said not to go. Okay, I'm breaking all the rules. Okay. Now I'm gonna go to line number 2, which is the black line here, and I'm gonna shade everywhere it says not to go. It says to shade to the right, so I'm gonna shade over here to the left. Okay, everywhere. Don't leave anything out. Shade every space you can possibly shade that it says not to shade. Okay? Now, line 3 says to shade. I'm just getting all of these places in here. Line 3 says to shade below it. See the blue arrow going down right here? So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go above it, which really doesn't matter because all that's already shaded in. And look what's left over with. You're left over with the part that's supposed to be shaded. So I told the students that like this method better. I told them, that's fine, but then take your pencil and highlight the answer. Highlight the region so I know where the answer is. And there's the region. Okay? I don't care which method you use, students, okay? Either one is fine. Just make sure you're consistent and do it well. Okay? Alright, now, let's try a more difficult one, okay? Here it is. Again, I'll give you a minute to copy this down. We're going to combine a quadratic inequality with a linear inequality, a system, and then we'll be done, okay? So let's solve this system. And again, how do you solve a system? You really can't just solve it. You have to graph it and see the answer. So when I tell you to solve a system of inequalities, I'm really saying graph it, okay? So we're going to solve this system. Go ahead and copy this down and go ahead and draw a coordinate plane. And then we're just about finished, actually. Okay, students, here we go. Now, for your first equation here, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite it with an equal sign. So here we go. X squared minus y equals 1. Now, students, please pay attention. In the past in Algebra 2, I'm sure, when you graphed your quadratic equations, y was always by itself. So it's going to be a lot easier to graph this if y is by itself. So I'm going to bring the y over here and make it positive. I'm going to bring the 1 over here and make it negative. So x squared minus y equals, x squared minus 1 equals 0. Got it? I messed up again, didn't I? Sorry. Third time's a charm. X squared minus 1 equals y. Now, if you look back in your notes, we've already graphed this, okay? Let's go back in our notes here real quick here. It's the exact same inequality we had here, okay? Y equals x squared minus 1. Now I've done this to save some time, okay? So in your notes, we already have the table of values for this, okay? And it's right here. There it is. So there's no need to do all the work again. There's the table of values. Now, if you want me to review, I'll review for you very quickly one more time, okay? And for those that have it, please be patient. I will be very, very quick. Remember, x squared, there's no x term, so put a 0x, minus 1 equals y. The x squared coefficient is your a, the x coefficient is your b, your constant term is your c. You always use this to find the middle x value on your table of values. Always. Okay? So that's a quick little review there. Now moving on. We have our table of values already, so we're good there. So let's go ahead and plot these points, okay? Here we go. 2, 3, 1, 0, 0, negative 1, negative 1, 1, or negative 1, 0. And actually, I think I messed up here. It should be 1, 0. Then 0, negative 1, then negative 1, 0, and then negative 2, 3. Okay? Now notice this time, we do have the line underneath it. Do you see that? We do. So it'll be a solid parabola. Okay? A solid parabola. And I wonder if the arrow's been turned any. I'd be really careful here. I'm going to go ahead and test 0, 0 just to make sure, okay? So in your original equation right here, we're going to test 0, 0. So 0 squared minus 0 less than or equal to 1. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 is less than 1. That's true. 0 is less than 1. So we're going to shade. Oh, don't shade. Don't go like this. Not yet, okay? I'm going to draw an arrow like this so I know I'm shading on the inside. Okay? There we go. We're about halfway done. Now let's go ahead and graph. Let's go ahead and label this. We'll call this graph number 1, inequality number 1. Now let's go on to number 2. Okay? We have a linear inequality, so I'm going to rewrite it with an equal sign. Negative 0 plus y is just y. Y equals 1. So when I put 0 in for x, I get out a 1. Now let's put 0 in for y. So negative x plus 0 equals 1, okay? Negative x plus 0 is negative x. If negative x equals 1, then x equals negative 1. So when I put 0 in for y, when I put a 0 in for y, I got out negative 1 for x. So there's my two ordered pairs. So 0, 1, negative 1, 0. Okay? Now, will it be a solid line or not? Look right here. Yes, it will be, because I have an equal sign here. So yes, it will be. So go ahead and draw your solid line. There we go. Now, let's test the point and see if we're going to shade above this line or below this line, okay? So here we go. I'm going to test 0, 0 because it's right here, not on the line. So negative, then the 0 for x, and then a 0 for y. Less than or equal to 1. 0 plus 0, 0, 0 is less than 1. That's true. So we're going to shade toward this point, so the black line will shade downward. Okay? So guys, it's pretty simple. The parabola is saying to shade on the inside, but we have to stay below the black line. So it's going to be this area right here. Right in there. Now you're going to be surprised if you're really understanding this. You're going to be shocked to know that there are students who really understand, who really see how to do what I just did. So if you're struggling with seeing where to shade, then do the opposite method I showed you, okay? So do the exact opposite of what this red line says. The red line says to shade on the inside, so I'm going to shade everywhere on the outside. Everywhere on the outside I possibly can, okay? As much as I can, fill up the whole graph, okay? Shade everywhere outside the parabola. Leave nothing unshaded. Now the black line says to shade below it, so I'm going to shade everywhere above this black line. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what it said to do, okay? And if you do that, you're left with one region. I'm going to highlight it in blue for you. And there it is. There's your answer right here. Right there. That's the only part that's not shaded in. Now, for some of you, it might help doing it this way, okay? That's totally up to you. So there's your answer right in there. Now, in closing today, I would like to say a couple of things. First of all, it is possible, listen to me, for a system of inequalities to have no solution. That is definitely possible. Quickly turn your books to page 861. Okay, I want you to do that, so please, I'm going to pause a second, turn your books to page 861, and look at the bottom of the page at example 6. Okay, notice the picture at the bottom right, and to be honest with you, I think that should be bottom left. Okay, so bottom left. I'm going to pause while you do that. Please turn your books to page 861. Look at example number 6 at the bottom, and then look to the left, okay? Now, there is an example right there. You'll see an example of a system of inequalities that has no solution. Notice the shaded areas will not intersect. Do you see it, guys? There's the coordinate plane. There's a dotted line like this. And the shaded area is down here. And there's a dotted line like this. And the shaded area is up here. So this line is saying to go this way. This line is saying to go this way. There is no region that both shadings agree with. Thus, the answer to the system is no solution. Okay? And that can happen. So you need to understand sometimes there will be answers with no solution. Alright? Second, in your homework, that when you do homework from lesson 14.3, there will be some equations that you might not recognize. Thus, you won't be able to graph them. That's okay. Relax. Just use the homework help video to review these equations, and get help on how to graph them, and you will be totally totally fine. Okay, that's it, guys. Have a great day. If you have any questions, I hope this video's been a help. If you have any questions, don't